This afternoon, Grand Admiral Dönitz announced the death of Adolf Hitler. This death has not been confirmed by Allied sources.
In April 1945, Hitler was the most wanted man in Europe. Dead or alive, the victorious Allies needed to see his body, in the dock or in the grave. But in the chaos of war, proof the dictator had died proved elusive. Maybe Hitler was dead. Maybe he'd escaped.
I have one testimony that tells me the exact burial spot of where Hitler is buried in Patagonia. There are an incredible amount of witnesses who saw Nazi submarines come to the coast in Argentina and crates full of Nazi documents and gold being unloaded.
Concern is being expressed over the possibility that Adolf Hitler might attempt to seek refuge in Argentina.
We all differ, oftentimes, on the facts and why they happened, what happened. And clearly, one of the biggest examples of this kind of difference of interpretation was what happened to Hitler at the end of World War II.
The mystery of the missing dictator drew in spies, scientists and historians from America, Russia and Britain. As recently released documents show, it led the FBI into its most incredible manhunt, searching for Hitler from the subways of the Bronx to the jungles of Latin America.
The FBI did receive information that Hitler had fled from Germany, that he was in Argentina, that he was in various parts of the United States, that he was in other places. And the areas where we had jurisdiction in the United States and to some extent in South America, we conducted inquiries to see if there was any truth to those allegations.
The Allies spent 6 years trying to defeat Hitler. It would take them many times longer to sort out the confusion that surrounded his fate. Conspiracy, fact, and fiction all rushed in to fill the vacuum left by the missing dictator.
Extracts from captured German newsreels. This is said to be the room in which the alleged attempt on Hitler's life was made.
Hitler was no stranger to cheating death. In 1944, German officers tried to blow him up at the Wolf's Lair headquarters. 4 men standing near were killed.
A nice, easy explanation for gullible people.
Fearing further attacks, Hitler sowed confusion about his whereabouts. Even in 1944, people weren't sure if he really was dead or alive.
As to where they got hurt, there's no evidence. Anyway, the Führer, looking rather more round-shouldered than usual, goes from bed to bed, commiserating with the casualties. Maybe this is Hitler's double, or perhaps his double was killed by the bomb. Though there are scores of theories, the facts are not yet known.
In the final months of the war, even the Germans couldn't be certain. Since the 1944 bomb plot, Hitler kept well out of sight, hidden away in bunkers. The last ordinary Germans who saw him in the open were a handful of the Hitler Youth.
There were speculations already in the fall of 1944 about his escape and his whereabouts. So when the end of the war came, this was a story that had already long been prepared.
Many of Hitler's most senior supporters did try to escape. Himmler was captured dressed as a private soldier. Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo, was never captured. And down in the Chancellery bunkers, Hitler's staff tried repeatedly to persuade him to get out before it was too late. Flight was certainly possible.
Up till the 22nd of April, when the net closed, they could get out by air. Big aeroplanes could take off on the 22nd, and a whole convoy of them went off from Berlin to Berchtesgaden on the 22nd, carrying quite a large number of people out, all those who opted to get out. The Russians couldn't be everywhere.
During the final weeks of the war, this was the easiest route out of Berlin. The main east-west avenue was used by the Nazis as a runway right up until the last moment when Berlin fell. The Nazis even had captured British planes at hand to try and make their escape without being shot down. The man who was the switchboard operator in Hitler's bunker claims that this was the plan, in place and ready to spirit Hitler from under the noses of the Allies.
2 Flugzeuge nördlich von Berlin, das war die Ju-390, die konnte 18.000 Kilometer fliegen, ohne zu tanken. Und eine Blum und Voss, die konnte den gleichen Radius erreichen. Der Hitler hätte wegfliegen können.
The possibility of losing Hitler gave the advancing Soviets added urgency. On April the 22nd, the first Soviet armies reached the outskirts of Berlin, still fiercely defended. They desperately hoped that Hitler was still in the city.
Stalin organized special teams in SMERSH. SMERSH was the military counterintelligence service during the war. As we all know from the James Bond movies, it means death to spies, whose job it was to find Hitler, and hopefully Stalin would find him alive.
Конечно, Сталин хотел бы захватить Гитлера. И он предполагал его предать суду.
But capture was the one thing Hitler was determined to avoid at any cost. The reality of what lay in store for fallen dictators was not what he had in mind.
Just before the end came the news of what had happened to Mussolini, how he had been shot and strung up upside down in a garage in Milan. He didn't want that to happen to him.
As Stalin's SMERSH teams advanced to the center of Berlin, they questioned prisoners, checked corpses. Where was Hitler? Could he have slipped through the noose and escaped? The first news of Hitler's fate did nothing to dispel the confusion. On May the 1st, Soviet commander Zhukov received a message from Hitler's bunker claiming that Hitler had committed suicide on April the 30th. Just a few hours later came a radio broadcast that told a different story.
Deutsche Männer und Frauen, Soldaten der deutschen Wehrmacht. Unser Führer Adolf Hitler ist gefallen.
German radio claimed that Hitler had died fighting at the head of his troops. This wasn't what the Soviets had been told at all. They thought Hitler had died a day earlier by his own hand. In the confusion of Allied victory, doubt about the fate of the fallen dictator filled the airwaves.
The Berlin announcement that Hitler is dead has left this part of Germany speechless and resigned. There is no further confirmation, of course, as to the authenticity of this report.
We bring you now Seymour Corman from Munich.
There is some caution about accepting the German announcement as fact. It might be a trick. It might be a desperate effort by Hitler to disguise himself and escape.
The mere possibility that Hitler had escaped struck at the heart of Allied fears and paranoia about the Nazis. If Hitler cheated the hangman, how could justice ever really be done? If the dictator of the German Reich survived, how could anyone be sure the evil he brought was dead? On the 2nd of May, Soviet troops captured Berlin's government buildings. This was the final symbolic defeat of Nazi Germany. It was 2 days since the radio announcement of Hitler's death, and the world waited for proof. If he was dead, where was the body? Hitler's own headquarters had barely fallen when a special Soviet search team arrived on the scene. Its mission was to find Hitler. It didn't take long before they were rewarded. Alenia Rezaviska was the team translator.
Один из приехавших из штаба Первого Белорусского фронта. Он, проходя мимо, сказал: ой, смотрите, вот похож как на Гитлера, это Гитлер.
Here was proof that Hitler had died after all. At last, there was a body. The Soviets called in some captured Nazis to confirm that this Hitler was the Hitler.
Так немножко с усиками, немножко, знаете, такая челочка. И немцы, ну, целых много немцев сказали, что нет, 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 каждому. А один сказал: ну, похож все-таки.
Finding dead dictators was turning out to be an inexact science. This body, the Soviets noticed, was wearing darned socks. Surely, they thought, Hitler wouldn't have died wearing darned socks. So they decided that this body was not Hitler after all. There were 15 corpses in the Chancellery garden, amongst them that of Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels and his wife had murdered their children, then killed themselves. It was as they were investigating the end of the Goebbels that the Soviets stumbled on a second possible Hitler.
Он их привел вот к бункеру, значит, Гитлера, где лежал, ну, в свое уже не было тут Геббельса, он им показал вот здесь. А в это время один из вот этих солдат обратил внимание на воронку. Воронка такая присыпанная, видно, что вот ну, немножко землей сверху, ну, в общем, засыпано там чем угодно. Он вступил в эту воронку, и под ним, так сказать, это дело, ну, как бы, ну, так несколько провалилось, и показалось кусок одеяла, видимо, что-то еще, нога или что-то еще показалось человеческое, черное, обгорелое. Ну, они, значит, конечно, это раскопали, и два трупа, мужчины и женщины, но неузнаваемые на лицо.
If the bodies could be identified, then worries about Hitler's escape might be laid to rest. So the Soviets picked them up and put them in wooden crates. They took them here, to Buch, an old lunatic asylum just outside Berlin. But identifying the bodies was almost impossible. The corpse of the man they had on the slab was so badly burnt that hardly any of the lower body was left. Yet the Soviets refused even to tell the Americans or the British what they were up to, let alone ask for help.
Разбирает, что называется, все по косточкам разбирает, все. Его рост, его, понимаете, все данные его физические, его внутренние органы. В общем, короче говоря, в этих условиях это невозможно.
The autopsy was carried out under less than ideal conditions. It was a wartime situation. It was quite chaotic. The field hospital operation. It wasn't a perfect autopsy by any stretch of the imagination.
The only way of identifying this as Hitler's body was through the teeth. So the Soviets scoured Berlin trying to find Hitler's dentist. Two of the people they found said they were part of Hitler's dental team. They drew pictures from memory of what Hitler's teeth looked like. According to the Russians, the dentist's hand-drawn pictures matched the body on the slab. But Stalin held back the findings of the autopsy, and at a time of increasing international tension, he made a staggering claim.
Stalin told President Truman at the Potsdam Conference in late July and early August of 1945 that Hitler was alive in Argentina.
He used it as a stick to beat the West with after the war, but it also, he evidently, at some level, actually believed that Hitler had survived the war.
Stalin had reasons to doubt the Soviet autopsy. Everything hinged on the evidence of the teeth. No X-rays were available which might prove without doubt that this was Hitler's body. Stalin was also suspicious and paranoid to the bottom of his heart. On something as important as the fate of Hitler, he had no problem discounting the conclusions of a handful of surgeons.
Сталин превратил это в тайну. Это стало государственной тайной, за которую можно было получить от 7 до 15 лет тюрьмы за разглашение. То есть это попало в разряд государственных тайн.
Thanks to Stalin, the identity of this body was clouded with doubt. Stalin's deputy, Marshal Zhukov, had announced that Hitler was dead. Now, he'd changed his mind.
Zhukov gave a second press conference, and he completely withdrew the substance of his first. He said that there was no evidence that Hitler was dead, that he could easily have escaped, that the runway was open, that he was probably in Spain or in Argentina.
Stalin's claim threw his allies into turmoil and caught the imagination of the world. Amongst those most taken with the news was General Eisenhower. Months after Berlin had fallen, Eisenhower's doubts were publicly quoted.
We have been unable to find one tangible piece of evidence of Hitler's death. Even though I initially believed that Hitler was dead, there are now reasons to assume that he is alive.
The press rushed in to spread the confusion.
Russian sources stated that the Soviet government did have some lingering doubts.
The United States Army does not know whether Hitler is alive or dead.
Allied Germany, December 19th. Soviets not convinced Hitler dead.
As they poked around the ruins of his office, the Allies still couldn't make up their minds about what had happened to Hitler. 4 months after victory in Europe, confusion still reigned as to whether the dictator was dead or alive. Far from being brought to justice, Hitler had melted away.
The entrance to Hitler's air raid shelter. It was just outside that the bodies of Hitler and Eva Braun are said to have been destroyed. At any rate, that's one story, but we can all form our own opinion as to whether these are relics of the event or not. The Germans said petrol was poured over their bodies and they were burnt. It might be true, it might not.
In the summer of 1945, the Soviets made yet another shattering claim, that the British were secretly holding Hitler alive. To counter this, British military intelligence sent out a young army major, Hugh Trevor Roper, to tie up the loose ends.
The Russians accused the British of harbouring Hitler and Eva Braun in their zone, alive, for some nefarious but unstated purpose in the future. And at this point, my superior officer, who was called Dick White, decided enough is enough. It's perfectly ridiculous that the facts have not been established. He charged me with this mission.
But starting over a month after the first reports of Hitler's death, Trevor Roper's mission was fraught with difficulties. The bunker had already been ransacked by the Russians, and what evidence remained was rotting in the dark, damp interior.
It was an extraordinary experience to go down into that deep bunker and find this buried headquarters were dark because the electricity had gone. It was flooded over one's ankles in water.
Tying up Hitler's loose ends was proving a lot harder than the British had hoped. And Trevor Roper's task was hardly helped by the fact that neither the Soviets, nor the Americans, nor the British shared information or evidence. Most important of all, the Soviets had imprisoned nearly all of the key witnesses who were in the bunker at the time of Hitler's alleged escape.
I realized here were several of the people I was looking for, rather important people. Bauer, Hitler's pilot, Rattenhuber, the head of Hitler's guard, people I wanted to interrogate.
Trevor Roper had to base all his most important conclusions on the evidence of just one man, Erich Kempka, Hitler's chauffeur. Kempka left him in no doubt what had happened to Hitler.
I mean, to him the alternative was complete success or annihilation. All the evidence is that he shot himself. He used a revolver, certainly.
This became the official British version. But the British uncovered no bloodstains, no bullet holes, no bullets in the room where they thought Hitler had shot himself. And Britain's findings made no difference to the Soviets, who still said Hitler was alive. Depending on whom you listen to, he had shot himself, taken poison, died at the head of his troops, or even escaped. In this climate of doubt, the lack of evidence for Hitler's death would have a strange psychological effect on the world. Across the Atlantic, the Americans were on the verge of their own extraordinary investigation into the missing dictator. In September 1945, the FBI started one of its most extraordinary investigations into whether Adolf Hitler had escaped Berlin and made it across the Atlantic.
In a big spy roundup in the States, the FBI, America's CID, have done a good job under J. Edgar Hoover.
The director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, was a paranoid, suspicious, neurotic man who had built his career on finding the enemy within.
They're traitors, while the rest are spies.
Hoover had no sympathy whatsoever for the Nazis. He, as well as the rest of us, regard Hitler as a prime evil and a prime enemy of the United States.
These FBI documents, only recently released, point to the hysteria and worry that spread from Berlin across the Atlantic within a matter of days.
Dear Mr. Hoover, recently I saw a poll on whether Hitler was alive. I am one of many others that thinks that Hitler is still alive and possibly here in the good country we are so fortunate as to live in.
Polls at the time showed that a majority of people actually believed that Hitler had survived the war and was still alive, and this led to a lot of Hitler sightings.
All these lonely people all across America would write Hoover letters from their lonely rooms saying that they felt they saw someone who looked like Hitler in a cafe they frequented, or they passed someone in the street who looked like Hitler.
The FBI received thousands of tip-offs from across the United States, all claiming to offer invaluable information as to the whereabouts of Hitler.
Well, I remember one in there. It seemed that a woman said that she had seen Hitler on a subway stop in the Bronx, as I think I recall.
The FBI tip-offs ranged from full-blown accounts, including descriptions of height and weight, to simple one-line teasers, offering no more than, if you want to know where Hitler is, then call this number.
Dear sir, I'll bet $1 to a donut that Hitler is located right in New York City. There's no other city in the world where he could so easily be absorbed.
He has spent the past winter bussing dishes. Is it possible that this is none other than Adolf Hitler of Germany?
I've read in the papers about you hunting Hitler. Maybe you will laugh, like my family, at me, but I thought I saw him at the
Adolf Hitler, German Führer, owns 8,960 acres of land in Colorado.
In many cases, these people are psychotic, or they have other type of medical difficulties. In some cases, they're people who are hostile to other people and report these things falsely. Some people, they have just a desire to associate themselves with something that's prominent.
It is to be noticed that at the time of the interviewee would interrupt the interviewer and play the violin.
You can waste a lot of time and effort there on it, and money. But then again, you have to be careful that you don't overlook something that might be serious.
At the height of the Hitler hysteria, every bureau across the United States received sightings of Hitler somewhere in America. With the mystery still mushrooming out from Berlin, the FBI investigations grew to 1,000 agents working on these reports at any one time. They generated over 1,200 separate FBI documents and reports on Hitler's escape.
So much is crossed out, so you have, black bloc said at black bloc that Hitler, black bloc, and it adds a layer of mystery that doesn't exist if the stupid FBI censors had just, allowed us to read the original reports.
People even sent in handy hints from the press on how Hitler might have altered his appearance. The most enthusiastic Hitler hunter of them all was the Police Gazette. Few news counters and barbershops failed to provide their customers with this sensational sheet, in which hardly a week passed without the latest scoop on where Hitler had been sighted. All these reports had to be noted by the FBI as well.
Usually the articles didn't have any specifics. They just gave a statement that it was quite possible that Hitler might be somewhere. But that doesn't give you much to go on.
There's a chicken and egg problem with the Police Gazette accounts. You don't know which came first. The accounts in the Police Gazette, which then had the Police Gazette readers seeing Hitler in every roadhouse and cafe, or whether people in roadhouse and cafes wrote Hoover, and it began to spread, and then it entered into the Police Gazette, and it became a self-perpetuating phenomenon.
While the FBI chased phantoms in the United States, the Soviet Union sat on any evidence that might settle Hitler's fate one way or the other. There was one bit of evidence that could have sewn things up once and for all, the body that was found in Berlin. But the Soviets never looked at it again after the first autopsy of 1945. In fact, Hitler's remains, if they were Hitler's remains, were treated by the Russians with staggering neglect.
Их закопали так, чтобы уже в часы, когда население не выходит на улицу, это так было, такой негустой такой лесочек маленький, и поставили с такого скрытного часового. Пали, потому что они не глубоко были зарыты, значит, и чтоб собаки не раскопали. Вот, конечно, собаки тоже могли рыть, но такого не было зафиксировано.
Soviet intelligence continued to confuse the West by arguing that Hitler might be alive.
СМЕРШ и КГБ попытались доказать, что Гитлер действительно не погиб самоубийством, а как-то исчез. И была начата специальная операция под названием «Операция МИФ».
Nobody knows whether Stalin really believed it, or whether it was just a Cold War ruse. But Operation Myth was the cornerstone of Stalin's claim that Hitler had escaped and was being looked after by Western fascists.
In Spain was General Franco. In Argentine was Colonel Perón. And these, from Stalin's point of view, were both semi-Nazi reactionary dictatorships who supported the Germans. And therefore that is where he would have gone.
Stalin's belief was not completely unreasonable. Even before 1945, Argentina had a large German population. Hitler wouldn't be the first German to escape to South America after the war, and certainly not the first Nazi.
I found 300 confirmed war criminals who escaped to Argentina. Now, these are people with court cases that have had court cases opened against them in Europe. Now, if you extend that to the amount of SS officers or persons who are suspected of having committed war crimes but did not have cases opened against them, that number would probably rise to thousands.
Alongside all the crazy theories and Hitler sightings inside the United States, a more persistent notion of Hitler's fate took hold.
The basic scenario of his survival was that a double had died in his place in Berlin, and he and Eva Braun had managed to escape to Norway, and there taken a U-boat, a submarine, to Latin America.
This scenario took the FBI into one of its most remarkable inquiries. One of the reports that fueled their suspicion concerned the voyage of U-977.
We left Norway on the 6th or 7th of May. After we left Norway, we practically became a phantom boat. All the way around north of Scotland, past Ireland, past France and Biscay. They were looking for us and searching for us, and all we could do was on the listening apparatus to hear if there was anybody above us or near us.
This was a voyage that most people had thought physically impossible.
The clothes we were wearing got damp and had mold on it. Our bunks were damp. We couldn't shave, of course. You never shave on a submarine. Our teeth became loose through lack of fresh food and things like that. We felt dirty and we became more and more miserable.
U-977 made it to the coast of Argentina on August the 17th, 1945. The crew was immediately taken prisoner and accused of hiding Hitler on board.
Those U-boats came and surrendered to Argentina. The press reports there indicated that somebody in either Montevideo or in Argentina suggested that Hitler had been on those boats. And I think that caused a number of people to say, well, we have to look into that possibility.
More reports of U-boat landings came into the FBI over the next couple of weeks.
September the 21st, 1945, reports of Hitler hideouts, Los Angeles letter to Bureau. The first sub came close to shore about 11 p.m. after it had been signaled safe to land, and a doctor and several men disembarked, and Hitler and 2 women. Another doctor and 7 more men said Hitler had suffered from asthma and ulcers, had shaved off his mustache, and had a long butt on his upper lip.
Argentina's navy tried to capture the U-boats, but the huge coastline made it easy for escaping Nazis to get ashore.
Llegaban hasta acá, hasta una estancia perdida en la inmensidad y la desolación de la Patagonia. Llegar hasta ahí, bajar lo que se pudiera bajar, la gente, las cosas que trajeran, lo que pudieran utilizar del submarino. Digamos, eran zonas no patrulladas, zonas donde las estancias daban al mar. Ahora, en aquel momento, eso eran estancias alemanas. Con lo que queda abierta la cuestión de quiénes vinieron entonces en los submarinos y para qué planificar este viaje de los submarinos.
The FBI took this question extremely seriously. The combination of submarines and so many Nazis already in Argentina was enough to make the possibility of Hitler hiding out in the wilderness a genuine concern. To investigate the matter further, the FBI set up an operation behind the walls of the American Embassy in Buenos Aires.
I guess there are other places in the world where you could go, and it would depend upon how he escaped and where would be a logical place for concealment. But I'd say Argentina would not be a bad place to live. I can vouch for that.
John Walsh found himself working under very odd conditions. The FBI's power of interrogation was restricted. Their agents had to operate covertly. They had difficulty establishing the crucial network of informants on the ground. They were also limited by the fact that the G-men were very conspicuous.
While we were there in Argentina, those of us who were in the embassy, in the consulate, we did come under surveillance by the local police. And I know a number of times where I was out with other agents, and we would see people there who were obviously watching us. And they would be behind a newspaper, and every once in a while they'd drop the newspaper to look at us. And I recall the person who was with me said, well, you know, they look just like us, but they all have mustaches.
As information began making its way into the Argentine bureau, the G-men were soon able to piece together a pattern of Hitler's possible movements, based on reports of local sightings. Information from outside Argentina was relayed from Washington to Buenos Aires by the FBI radiogram system. All messages received were subject to further investigation by the team of G-men on the ground.
Discovered 2 sets of footprints leading in one direction only from high water mark, then across mudflats to shore proper near San Julian. At point where footprints ended, tire marks found, indicating car had turned at right angles to shore. Inquiries continuing.
The Bureau had received reports linking Adolf Hitler to the Eden Hotel in La Falda, Argentina. Nestled in the splendor of the foothills of the Andes, the Eden Hotel was the centerpiece of a long-established, wealthy German community.
Sí, era algo hermoso. Hoy a uno le da pena de verlo como está, ¿no? Esto era un hotel internacional, era un hotel que tenía todo lo que el pasajero necesita. De confort, la atención, orquesta a las 12 y a la noche. Y bueno, venían grandes la aristocracia de Córdoba, de Buenos Aires, donde estaba toda la fiesta. Y duraba el baile hasta las 4, las 5 de la mañana.
Since the 1930s, the Eden had been a paradise for its predominantly German clientele. The hotel was owned by Ida Eichhorn, a wealthy German socialite, whose connections in Germany reached the highest echelons of power.
Sé que ella viajaba continuamente a Europa. Bueno, según se decía por trabajo para buscar pasajeros, porque acá venía la crema de Europa, venía aquí.
It was Eichhorn's European connections that first brought her to the attention of the FBI. A dossier compiled on her at the end of 1945 revealed disturbingly close links to the German Reich.
Even before the Nazis came into power, she placed immediately by cable her entire bank account, amounting to 30,000 marks, at Goebbels' disposal.
Most compelling of all, the FBI discovered from European sources that she had over the years become one of Hitler's closest friends and confidants. The area surrounding the hotel was populated by Germans. Amongst them were believed to be a number of Nazi sympathizers. The trouble was, it was difficult for the G-men to go to La Falda in person. without blowing their cover.
We personally did not do surveillance work there. We would have sources that were outside the embassy that would do that. You just can't walk in and say, that you are looking for something. You have to develop a rapport and have some area of interest with the people that are going to help you on that.
A 17-year-old girl working as a maid at the Eden Hotel at the time is today still clearly able to recall her years of service and the people she worked for.
Eso ya fue dicho siempre, que aquellos eran nazis. Siempre lo han dicho que eran nazis ellos. Hasta el final, que ellos murieron, todavía le decían que eran nazis. Y ella tenía muchas cosas de él ahí en la casa, muchas cosas. Y hubo cartas que se le han entregado a Córdoba también, que las han visto. ¿Ves? Había muchas fotos de él, todo en la casa.
According to the FBI, if Hitler had come to Argentina, this would be his natural destination.
If the Fuhrer should at any time get into difficulties, he could always find a safe retreat at La Falda, where they'd already made the necessary preparations.
Catalina Gomero confirms all the FBI's fears and suspicions. After the fall of Berlin, after the British investigation into Hitler's death, after 2 Soviet investigations, Catalina says Adolf Hitler came to the Eden Hotel in 1948.
Después de la guerra estuve en la casa de familia. El hotel ya no trabajaban ellos, no estaban en el hotel ellos.
There is no doubt in Catalina's mind that she remembers Hitler's visit.
Bueno, yo lo que recuerdo de él llegó una noche, se ve que el chofer lo trajo, yo no, estaba en el 3er piso.
Catalina even recalls what Hitler ate.
Tuvimos orden de llevarle el desayuno, pero dejarlo en la puerta, golpear la puerta y dejar la bandeja. Comía bien porque lo que le poníamos venía vacía la bandeja. Bueno, ahí la mayoría de la comida siempre han sido todas alemanas. Lo que más se servía esos días era, suponer, los soufflés de queso, los kartoffelpuffer, como le decían ellos, con el puré de manzana, todas comidas más bien alemanas.
According to Catalina, the Hitler of the Andes was clearly recognizable as the Hitler of so many people's imagination, even though he'd lost his moustache.
Se ve que se los había sacado. Ahora la peluca sí, porque era una peluca lo que él tenía, no era pelo. 4 pelitos así, pero se veía que era una peluca. Era una casa que entraba gente todo el día, salían, pero eso fue privado, 3 días privado arriba. Pero abajo estaba como normal, como todos los días dentro. Eso no, fue como si no habría pasado nada. Fue una cosa muy, muy secreta, ¿vio? Muy, muy... Pero como han pasado tantos años, a mí me importa un pepino. Y si no lo quieren creer, que no lo crean, y chao. ¿Qué quiere que le diga yo? Yo digo lo que vi, nada más.
Like all the best mysteries, Catalina's story has an enigmatic ending.
Y arriba del Pan de Azúcar había unas casitas alpinas que eran de madera, yo creo que no existen más ya. Como a los 15 días la señora me dijo que teníamos que hacer una visita. Y fuimos nosotros con comida, todo de acá, y estaba él ahí. Según lo poco que se hablaba por teléfono, él estaba en La Rioja. Y después desapareció de acá.
If the man Catalina saw was Hitler, the FBI certainly failed to get him. Yet the events that she describes took place when senior Nazis, men like Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Mengele, were arriving in South America. And it wasn't until at least the mid-1970s that American intelligence officers closed their files on Hitler.
The information that we got, much of it was not credible. Others, where there was a possibility of some credibility, we made inquiries, but in none of them we found any true indication that Hitler was actually in Argentina or in the United States or in any place where we had any responsibility. All the investigation that we made then came to a dead end because there was nothing really specific had been found.
There aren't many people today who still think Hitler made it to Argentina. The KGB claims to have flushed Hitler's corpse into a Magdeburg River in April 1970. The Soviet files on Operation Myth were finally made public in the 1990s, revealing that Stalin had deliberately confused and misinformed the West about Hitler's fate. Even though the official search for Hitler has ended, his phantom continues to be relentlessly pursued. Fantasists who have for years hung on to every word published in the Police Gazette still follow him from the foothills of the Andes to Antarctica. There, they say, he awaits a flying saucer to take him to conquer another world, in another universe.
The myth of Hitler's physical survival is really about the survival of a unique kind of evil embodied in Hitler, about the survival of the mystery of Hitler, the fact that in some way he escaped explanation.
The remarkable story of Hitler's life after death is a clear warning of what can happen when a dictator melts away. The world wanted a clear sign that the cataclysm of World War II had ended. But Hitler's death went missing, and the fate of the last century's most terrible dictator took over 50 years to sort out.